Welcome to the Smarter Science of Slim, the scientifically proven program where you eat more and exercise less to burn fat and boost health.
Eat smarter, exercise smarter, live better. I am so ready for that.
Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor back with another bonus Smarter Science of Slim podcast. Today's show is going to be an epic one. I've already confirmed with today's guest that we have to have him back on because I spent this entire weekend just enamored in his book, which is actually his 8th book. It's called Escape the Diet Trap. And I tell you, there must be some sort of shared genetic heritage here because I was reading this book just saying, yes, yes, yes. I literally think we read the same studies. He is a brilliant man who is practicing out of the UK. He's helping thousands of people to escape the diet trap, which is the name of his book. You can learn more about him at drbriffa.com. Ladies and gentlemen, today's guest, Dr. John Briffa. John, welcome to the show.
Hello, and thank you for having me, and thank you very much for that introduction.
My pleasure, John. Well, let's back up here. John, the thing that struck me most about your book, Escape the Diet Trap, is that, so one, you are a doctor. In the US, you would be an MD. In the UK, you are called a, what is it called? Sorry.
We just call us doctors over here, I think.
Okay.
But I don't stand on ceremony, so just please call me John.
Okay, well, John, I wanted to call that out simply because when folks take a look at Escape the Diet Trap, they will see something very different than what they would see if they went to most doctors and asked most doctors how to lose weight. They would hear, you just need to eat less and exercise more. And in fact, you say that is a guaranteed path to failure. Why is there such a big difference between what you have found to be effective and what most doctors recommend?
I think it all started when I had some personal experience of changing my own diet. You know, I was actually a young doctor. I hadn't been qualified long. I put on a fair amount of weight during my 6 years at medical school. I was also in not a very good state of health, to be perfectly frank. Felt very tired, even when I sort of slept my sleep debt away, if you like. And I met an elderly man who unwittingly opened my eyes to the idea that maybe my diet needed a bit of a look at. And I was laboring under the same misapprehensions that everyone else was, that, that I should eat a very carbohydrate-rich diet. I was an avid runner in those days. So I was doing a lot of cardiovascular exercise. And anyway, I ended up buying a book on nutrition, reading it, deciding that maybe I'd got things hopelessly wrong. I changed my diet and very quickly my health was transformed. So I felt, I think, more energized than I had in my whole adult life within a couple of weeks. And I also lost, a lot of the weight that I'd put on over 6 years in about 6 weeks. And I hadn't counted calories, and I certainly wasn't running anymore. I didn't really have any time to run anymore, to be perfectly frank. And this sort of led me off into thinking, well, number one, diet's important, which I hadn't really considered before. And number two, maybe we've got our basic nutritional principles, conventional wisdom, wrong. Maybe it's just wrong. Maybe it doesn't really work. And I ended up being so interested in the subject matter, although I didn't realize it at the time I was going to switch careers, but I did then switch careers. And I started advising people in clinical practice about, how they could take control of their own health, not just their weight. Not all of my patients came because of weight, but, their fatigue or irritable bowel syndrome or skin problems or diabetes, and how they could sort of basically get in control of that. And I am a naturally sort of curious person, and I'm also very, very interested, as I think you are, Jonathan, in the end result. So I don't exist in practice to sit there telling people to do things that just don't work very well. That's just not how I'm wired at all. So over the years, obviously, the approach was refined somewhat. We generally get, obviously good results in our patients, but also, more and more research came out, and I became more and more interested, if you like, in the research. And then it became absolutely clear that not only was the approach that I was beginning to take in practice effective, it was utterly evidence-based. And it's a marriage of those two things. What you find works in practice is, as you probably did back in the day, and what the science shows that ultimately I think should inform us as people who are either practitioners or people seeking to educate people about how they can achieve their goals much more easily. And ultimately, this has come out in the form of my writings, including my last book, Escape the Diet Trap, where I attempt effectively to explain specifically why eating less and exercising more not only doesn't really work for weight loss, but can't really work. And at some point I enumerate 10 specific reasons why eating that way or exercising that way essentially works against the body rather than with it, to achieve weight loss. And then also, of course, what works better, both from a scientific standpoint, theoretically, and also what the evidence shows. And then we go on to look at, well, then what are you going to do about it? All good education should include some practical tips. So the book obviously has that in there as well. But it was really written as a sort of takedown of the calorie principle using a very scientific approach.
John, so many things to highlight here. So first, you have personally experienced and in practice have experienced and read the research demonstrating that this conventional eat less, exercise more approach it literally cannot work. Not only does it not work in the real world, but once you understand the physiology and neurobiology of the body, it can't work. You also mentioned how you practice as a physician. At the end of your education, your health was suffering, and you then read a book on nutrition, implying that maybe the nutrition education provided to you when you were being trained as a physician was either non-existent or inadequate or wrong. And that led you to the conclusion that diet is important. So you went through medical training, you received insufficient or inaccurate nutrition education. You then learned that diet was important, but that how the medical community was presenting dietary information was basically backwards. This is so clear in practice and is so clear in the research, John. So why isn't it becoming mainstream faster?
Well, I think there's. I don't want to be. I don't want this to be a political rant, but there are, I think, commercial and economic considerations here. So, for example, if you go with conventional wisdom, which is basically around calories, then you can, for example, as a food company, produce really any old rubbish and sell that to people as something healthy on the basis that it's got not very many calories in it, but it can be absolute rubbish. You could eat carpet, not very calorific. It's still not great. It's also low fat and high fiber carpet, isn't it? But it's still not great food, is it? And so I think there's a sort of sleight of hand that goes on when the idea that fat is fattening and certain fats cause heart disease, and so let's have highly processed vegetable oils instead. And every time I look at, first of all, I think practically all of conventional nutritional wisdom is just plain wrong. And every time I look at it, I see that there's usually a commercial explanation for it. So just to give you another example, I really cannot find any evidence that saturated fat causes heart disease. I just can't find any. And I look at that in the book, and it's explored there. But why would you want to persuade people that saturated fat causes heart disease? Now, some people do that completely unwittingly. They're ignorant, like I was. Years ago, I believed saturated fat causes heart disease. Why? Because that's what people had told me. And not because I'd looked at the research. It's just what people had told me. It's like sort of folklore. Now, why would people want you to believe that if they were doing it deliberately, even though they know it's not the case? Well, because then you can take a food, reduce saturated fat, or make something completely new, like margarine compared to butter, and then sell that to people, on the, assumption that eating less saturated fat is somehow inherently healthy. Now, I actually think these forces and the whole cholesterol thing in particular because now we have pharmaceuticals, of course, in that area, is very significant, because there's a lot of lobbying power, there's a lot of PR power there, and if you repeat something long enough, hard enough, stridently enough, it generally gets accepted as fact, even though when you look at the facts from a scientific perspective, it doesn't stack up at all. So I think some of it is sort of an unwitting ignorance that all of us can be prone to, but some of it is deliberate. And I think the reality is that there's a lot of money to be made in misinformation, and we're suffering at the hands of that. All industries have a degree of misinformation and corruption, no doubt. The problem here is that this is affecting, obviously, people's health, and that's like a fundamental right, I think, for people. So, I feel agitated and exercised about the idea that, this amount of misinformation can go on, because, like you probably did, I see the results of this at first hand. So I see people who not only have failed at the hands of eating less and exercising more, they've also potentially wrecked their health. And they've also potentially spent years beating themselves up because they felt that there must be something wrong with them, because everyone knows that eating less and exercising more must work. And if it isn't working for them, then the problem must be them, not the approach, do you see? And there's a whole bunch of things now that you've got, physical and emotional, that this person may be experiencing and suffering from as a result of basic misinformation. And so, I'm obviously keen, like you are, to strip away some of the myth and explode some of those things, and then tell people what really looks to be the truth about how they can, for example, restore their health or control their weight much more easily. And that's the key, isn't it? Because I see this in your own work, Jonathan, much more easily than they've been told. The reality is, for the majority of individuals, controlling weight is relatively easy when you know how. Okay. The problem is you have to use the right approach. And currently and historically, as you point out in your own work, for the last few decades, we've been given explicitly the wrong approach.
John, I think it's important to highlight that you mentioned ignorance, and not in a derogatory sense, but unless someone gives us the correct information, this is not just something we're born with. We aren't just born with the knowledge of how human metabolism works, although we do have pretty good common sense. We see people, we say, oh, Tom is so lucky to have a fast metabolism, and Mary is so unfortunate that she has a slow metabolism, and we kind of get that different bodies process different foods differently, and that maybe there are things we could do to change the way our body processes food. But all too often, this ignorance, as you mentioned, and it sounds like you experienced personally, is perpetuated because, and I don't want to put you in a position to say anything against anyone else here, so feel free to dodge this question if you would like, but your story is exceptionally interesting to me because you are a doctor. You're highly decorated. You've been on many shows, written in many noteworthy publications. And when you left your medical training, you openly state you knew nothing, or what you knew was wrong in terms of nutrition. But most people and most doctors in that position are considered the experts because they're a doctor. What they say is true, rather than because it's true, it's true. Like, there's a difference there, right?
Yeah. You just reminded me something on your video that I was watching on YouTube, where you say, our biology isn't dictated by maths, it's dictated by biology. And you're absolutely right about that. But getting back to your question, I do think that there are certain issues that we have in medicine that relate to the doctor-patient relationship, and particularly, what I see is, quite a lot of doctors basically buying into this notion that, what they believe must be right, as you're alluding to, and never really questioning, well, am I or aren't I, and what is the basis for my knowledge, and most importantly, does it work when I apply it in my patients? on the plus side, this is changing beyond all recognition, I think, because, to be honest, 20 years ago, it would be very, very difficult for most individuals to know any better. But now, with the advent of the internet in particular, there is unlimited amounts of information out there. And there is always, now not all of it is good, but there is always the possibility that people can start to read things and start to think for themselves and start to take information to their doctor and choose not to see that doctor if they feel that they're, not being, for example, listened to or respected or whatever. And I see this happening more and more and more. And, a lot of doctors, I think, are very disparaging about the internet because they refer to it as Dr. Google and, Professor Wikipedia or whatever they do. Do you know what I mean? And that sort of, I'm the one with the medical degree. But the reality is there are droves of people out there now who understand aspects of health, including nutrition, way, 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 way better than the average doctor. And so a lot of individuals are now becoming their own doctors, and they're not deferring necessarily to medical and health professionals like me. They're sort of doing their own research, doing their own reading. Someone, for example, you've got a book coming out. And if someone were to read that book, I haven't read the book, but I know a bit about your work. If they were, they are probably going to understand, even if they, from a standing start, and they know nothing about nutrition or physiology or biochemistry, in an afternoon, they will probably have a much, much better grasp of nutrition, weight control, general health than their doctor has. And I'm being totally serious. Now, that is powerful in my view. And I don't think many of we doctors have sort of got used to that notion now. Not yet. I mean, it's going to come, presumably, at some point we're going to wake up and realize we have to get with the program. But right now, to be perfectly frank, I think we doctors are becoming increasingly disenfranchised, because basically we haven't really kept abreast of what's going on. And we've been too easily led by, I don't know, the rhetoric that you get from, any industries like the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry. Anyway, everything's changing now, and I'm hugely positive about that. And I'm a great believer in people empowerment.
I couldn't agree more in terms of that individual empowerment and how exciting it is. And I also never mean to disparage the medical community. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. And when people ask me, I just say, for example, a primary care physician here in the US, right? Like there's so much they need to know. I mean, it's just the sheer amount they're seeing patients, they're interacting with people. That is very different from reading these dense journal articles. We actually, I think, tend to almost expect, I think, too much from our doctors. I mean, I physically don't know how, maybe you can tell me, how a doctor, because you do this, can see patients back to back to back for 8 to 10 hours per day and stay up on all the current research. Like, it seems like generally there are two jobs. There is the person who sees people and then the people who conduct research. But we're asking a primary care physician to be all things to all people. That seems like a lot.
It is, but I don't want to let we doctors completely off the hook here. First of all, I agree with you. There's certain things that medicine does, by the way, that I think are sort of near miraculous. And for example, a lot of trauma medicine or emergency medicine and surgery, I think can be highly useful. And a lot of my friends are doctors, and I think a lot of them do very useful work. But I do see a bit of an attitudinal problem with some doctors, where there's this basic idea that, they know what they know and they don't need to know anything else. And there isn't really, how can I put, an appetite for reviewing their knowledge and going into areas that are going to be particularly useful to their patients. They just sort of trot out, to be honest, conventional wisdom. And I think some of it may be, time constraints, but some of it actually I think is attitudinal. And that's something that I don't find easy to deal with and I don't agree with. I think sometimes we doctors have to work a little bit harder. However, for example, last night I had an email from what you would call a primary care physician, but we call a general practitioner here in the UK. And I've had 3 or 4 emails over the last year or so from him. And he had the same problems that we all have with our patients, overweight, diabetes, high blood pressure. He came across Escape the Diet Trap. He read it, and then he started, I know these are quite extreme, but he started buying copies for his patients. And every few months he sends me an update of sort of what's happened. And so I got another update literally last night. This email came in, and how many of his patients have, had fatty liver. There's one in particular who had, an enlarged fatty liver, and several months later, after applying the principles and Escape the Diet Trap, her liver is entirely normal now. How many people have come off their medication, diabetes and high blood pressure medication, for example. And there is a person who clearly was not content with just giving conventional advice and not seeing great results in his patients. And so I would say doctors don't have to read Escape the Diet Trap, but it's clearly possible that people, can review their knowledge, go again, learn again, because as I don't think I mentioned, but it's true, I didn't have a single hour's tuition at medical school on nutrition, which is a huge omission, of course. You'll understand that, and many of your listeners will understand that. So what do you do in that situation? Sometimes you do have to go the extra yard and, look for information that's going to be more beneficial to your patients, and then apply it and see whether it works, just as this doctor has. Now, I don't expect that of every doctor at all. But what I do know is that when doctors do question their practice and question conventional medicine and the sorts of beliefs that we have around, patient management, then that can often lead to a transformation in the way that doctor thinks and then behaves, and then obviously the most important thing, how that reflects then in the health of their patients.
It's very exciting, John. I started recently using the phrase a wellness renaissance, because I think, as you've captured so well in this call with the internet, with individuals like you who are just getting these amazing results, with books like Escape the Diet Trap, we are on the verge, and I think it's inevitable, of a wellness renaissance where we will start to see these amazing results and also see that accomplishing them is quite simple once you have the correct information. I often use the analogy of a flat earth, and how if you believe and you've been told that the earth is flat, it certainly makes sense to live in a certain way, like not to sail out too far because you may fall off the edge. But once you know that the earth is round, and for example, that gravity exists, and because of that, the people on the quote unquote bottom of the earth don't fall off, like, it makes sense too, but you have to have that new model. So folks, I cannot recommend any more highly John's book, Escape the Diet Trap, for understanding that new model of weight loss. We're not here to throw anyone under the bus. We're just here to say there was a model. Obviously, that model's not working. Look around. Also, if you want to look at the research, you can. It's very clear that it can't work. And there's a new simple model. And John, I cannot wait to have you back on the show to discuss that alternative model.
I would be delighted to come back. Thank you very much.
Well, John, it's been an absolute pleasure. And what's next for you?
Well, I've literally today I handed in the manuscript of another book. This isn't about weight loss. It's really about how people can manage their sort of total wellness and their total state. So I haven't really considered what's quite next because for the last few months I've been, well, you know what it's like to write a book. I've been and also keep everything else sort of running alongside that. But so right now, what's next? I'm going to take a week off and which I feel is deserved, and then we'll see where we get to after that. But I'll continue writing on my blog as we go. And I've got an afternoon full of patients tomorrow afternoon.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, listeners, until we chat with Dr. John Briffa again, which we absolutely will, I have to give you one definite homework assignment, and that is go to drbriffa.com, learn more about, I think, my brother from another mother here, because we are on, it just gets, the more I talk with him, the more I'm like, we've got to meet, sir, and check out his book, Escape the Diet Trap. If you like anything about what you hear on this podcast, you will absolutely love that book. Dr. Briffa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this wonderful conversation as much as I did, and please remember, this week and every week after, eat smarter, exercise smarter, and live better. Chat with you soon.
Wait, don't stop listening yet.
You can get fabulous free SANE recipes over at carriebrown.com.
And don't forget your 100% free eating and exercise quick start program, as well as free, fun, daily tips delivered right into your inbox at bailorgroup.com. That's BAILOR group.com.